Hey, welcome back, everybody. Expanding the zone. I'm Shayne Combs. He's Matt Combs here. If you're joining us on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you're listening out on your podcast app, thank you there as well. You can find us wherever you find your podcast each and every week. And subscribe to us, SVC Sports Zone, over on YouTube and watch. As always, we thank Dr. Chris Good for all his support. And Matt, I think we have just a great show this week. But we're saying, why can't I get that in writing? As there's been some fun things in the media here in this past week with Sean Payton and Nathaniel Hackett and some of those things I'll get to in a second. It got me thinking about unwritten rules, and throughout the fun sports world. That we've obviously had a huge interest in our whole lives, and then in leadership as well, even as we've gotten and it's some deeper leadership. I think there's those quote unquote unwritten rules. We've talked so much about, there's times we go to the handbook, and there's times we look for it in writing and it says this, therefore this is the exact rule and this is the exact consequence. Well, there's so many things that's obviously not spelled out completely, and it's the unwritten rule. So as I welcome you to show 55 here, I just wondered your take on when you think unwritten rules. Yeah, I don't know if it's a baseball, football, basketball, whatever. Just in general, where do you stand on that topic that can kind of be fun, but it's going to be very, very serious for us on the show here this evening?
Hey, growing up in and around sports, Shayne, there's unwritten rules everywhere. It seems like a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, maybe like most of the topics in our show, probably refers more to leadership and things like that. But like you said, just the sports alone, there's unwritten rules all the time, right? I mean, baseball has a ton of them. You and I both love baseball. I mean, there's all kinds of, little unwritten rules, whether it be you can't argue balls and strikes with a major league umpire.
For the longest time, like the bat flip,
the bat flip, you don't show up a pitcher,
yeah.
or, obviously, sometimes you'll see some retaliation, like we saw in the Cubs Cardinals game recently, where a Cubs batter accidentally hit the catcher. Next thing you know, he gets thrown at. I remember a couple years ago, a pitcher lost his mind because a batter, after flying out, ran across the mound. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
On the way back to the dugout, he went right over the mound. And pitcher just lost it on him. You know what I mean? So baseball has those unwritten rules. We've talked before in this show, Shayne, about certain coaching etiquette where, you don't press when you've got a big lead in basketball, or you don't steal a base when you got a big lead in baseball, or, when the team that's getting beat or winning by a bunch puts in their number twos in football, the right thing to do is put in your number twos, right? There's all these it's not in a rule book that you have to do that, right? That's an unwritten rule. And I think what's funny about it is I think we're going to find, as we get into this discussion tonight, there's some of these unwritten rules that pertain to leadership and coaching that are really important. Some of them, we just laughed about a couple, like what's the big deal about a guy running across the mound, right? That's funny, or whatever. The ones we're going to talk about tonight, though, affect people professionally, affect what you look like professionally. So I think that some of these are, important to discuss.
Well, as always, people that are familiar with expanding the zone, again, you can go back on the YouTube or the podcast app and listen to our previous 54 shows. As again, we're recording show 55 here this evening. Matt, there was a situation here in the NFL preseason that kind of brought this up. In expanding the zone, we always kind of look for topics that are right in the middle of the sports world, and see if we can't tie some leadership into them. And in this particular case, Sean Payton, the longtime successful NFL coach there at the New Orleans Saints, now with the Denver Broncos, he had worked for Fox last year as an analyst, did a real nice job. Crazy good coach in terms of just really has a reputation of being an X and O near genius, just real good on the offensive side of things. And he takes over the Denver Broncos there with Russell Wilson at quarterback. And if you're not familiar with the NFL, Denver was not good last year, right? It did not go well. It was a disaster. And Nathaniel Hackett was the name of their head coach last year. He's a first-year head coach, and that's not a name that a lot of coaches, or excuse me, a lot of fans probably recognize. To give you a little background on him, Nathaniel Hackett was a successful offensive coordinator in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers there at quarterback. And obviously, that's probably had a lot to do with his resume and getting him a head coaching opportunity. Well, again, it didn't go well, and didn't even make it through a season. He was fired. So now, fast forward, Aaron Rodgers goes to the Jets. Nathaniel Hackett has moved over to offensive coordinator with the Jets, and Sean Payton now there as the head coach in Denver. Well, Sean Payton comes out this past week and makes a comment that last year was a disaster and starts rattling off all the things they did wrong, and they had this many penalties pre-snap, and then the culture was terrible, and everybody who let it happen is to blame. And basically, in short, he was quoted as saying it's one of the worst coaching jobs in NFL history. And obviously that was a big headline. You got a Hall of Fame coach saying that about a situation. Now, some people felt like he was saying it to protect his quarterback. Some people said he's trying to win the locker room back over for he and his quarterback. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers took offense to it, went to bat as a Hall of Fame quarterback, went to bat for his offensive coordinator and so forth. And we'll get to all these different layers of it, Matt. I guess the first thing when you hear this stuff, I immediately start thinking about respecting the profession, about being a little bit more respectful of those who are fighting the same battles that we all fight each and every day. So with my coaching background, I certainly cringed when I heard the comments. I just wanted to get your initial reaction when you hear this from one coach about another. Your reaction is what?
Yeah, I definitely didn't care for it. I'm like you say you cringe. It's kind of like that for me too. When you hear something like that, I've always honestly kind of been a Sean Payton fan. I've never been, a big Saints fan or whatever, but I've always kind of liked him and kind of how he went about his business. Um, one mistake doesn't define a guy, but I do think he made a mistake in this situation. You said something about, some people thought he was trying to protect his quarterback. There's other ways to do that. There's totally different ways you could say that, in terms of, hey, for whatever reason, things didn't click last year between that staff and, my quarterback, and hopefully, to say it's the worst job, in NFL history. I just don't think it called for that. It reminded me, and I know you've been part of these situations too. It's funny how my coaching career went. I think back, and I've basically since I left Uniota, where I had played for Ron Lovely and was his assistant, I basically had 3 stops before coming back now to Uniota, even though not in a coaching role, right? But back here. And in each of those situations, at Alexander as an assistant coach, at Portsmouth East as a head coach, and at Vinton County as a head coach, I was in programs that either had struggled, okay, or even when I was an assistant at Alexander, was going into a new head coach, right? So obviously, each time was a new head coach, because twice that was me. But even the time I was at Alexander, okay, it was a new head coach taking over there as well. All right. And one thing that struck me right away in all those situations was that you need to go in, even though you are trying to put your stamp on a program, which is what you should do as a new coach. You really need to respect their history, even if their history isn't very good. Okay. And what I mean by that is, when you go in to take a job, I took over for a guy at Portsmouth East who had had a lot of success in his career, but most recently they hadn't been very good. Okay. Like the year before I got there, they'd won like 3 games, but you're talking about a guy who'd coached for many, many years and had some really good teams. So I thought it was important to respect his longevity and the program that he had built, just because they had struggled recently. That, it was important to come in and not act like everything, but respect the history they have had there. When I went to Vinton County, it was a different situation. They hadn't had any success, honestly, with the exception of 1 or 2 years in the history of the program. But again, it does me no good to come in and throw that former coach under the bus, even though maybe his last year there had been some struggles, right? There had been some discipline issues. There had been some friction. It doesn't do me any good. The approach I've always taken is you come in and you say, listen, I have my own ideas. This is going to be a program. We're going to run this program the way I think it needs to be ran. Okay. But it's nothing against your former coach or any of your former coaches. I'm just doing it my way. Okay. This is my way. I'm not saying anybody else's way is wrong, but this is the way we're going to do it. You don't just come in and say, hey guys, look, the guy that was coaching you before has no clue what he was doing. I'm here now and let's get after it. That just, to me, you don't gain respect of your locker room doing that. Am I making sense on that? That might be a long-winded answer, to what we're talking about here, but what good does it do you to come in and throw the former people under the bus when you have a job to do? Why not just focus on the job you have to do?
Well, it does. I look at any time a new coach comes in, and look, there's different levels of new coaches that come in. Sometimes it's a first year head coach, sometimes it's a head coach that's very established before, so they're coming in with a resume, and they're going to get the opportunity to be a little bit more blunt or whatnot. I guess that's why I use the term respect the profession. I was at a summer event here recently of for volleyball, and there was a situation where I had overheard. I didn't even know I was hearing the conversation. I was hearing the situation of a basketball coach talking to one of the young ladies at the side and talking about trying to get her to come to an open gym and give it a chance, and how it's going to be this and this and that. And long story short, without being too much with details, because again we're talking about high school sports, there was a situation where I just felt uneasy as I walked away, because I felt like the coach was taking a shot at the previous coach. And I just feel like at the high school level especially, we're all trying to fight the good fight. I mean, we've all been a first year head coach before. We've all had situations where we've been lucky enough to maybe have some good teams, but we've all had some teams where we know it's going to be a struggle. We've all had some discipline issues. I don't care who you are. You can coach as long as you want, win as many games you want. I guarantee you've had discipline issues with your kids where your kids didn't act the right way and you had to put a consequence in place. And if you haven't, then you need to hurry and get a publisher and write a book so that
Yeah,
we all can know, right?
right.
And it's a situation where you're respected. It's one thing if I come into a new program and I feel like, okay, I'm gonna get some paint a wall or paint a dugout or get a new uniform or get some new signs or whatever it may be. That's fine. But when you verbally take shots in the public, I think you weaken your stance in terms of that community. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yes.
one of those things where, you know, everybody in that community, there's going to be people that have been involved in that history. Maybe they've played, maybe they coached, maybe they had family involved in those
Yes.
things, and they were trying. So
Not only, Shayne, not to interrupt you, but let's take that to even more of a personal level. Not only do you weaken your stance in that community, okay, but you weaken your stance, I think, by the people that you lead, okay? Because let's face it, most people, I think, deep down feel like whatever you do to somebody, you might do to them. You understand what I'm saying on that? So whatever you do to somebody else, you might do to them. So if you're throwing the former coach under the bus, okay, and I'm a player, I'm thinking, might he throw me under the bus if things don't go well? You see what I'm saying? Or if I'm a principal that comes in, think about this, because I knew I had a friend who took over a principal job that was in pretty bad shape. Okay, really needed to change the culture. Okay, long story short, you know, he's meeting with these people and trying to figure out a way to say, listen, the way you guys did it before was not good. We got to do it differently. But I liked his approach. It was this. Listen, let's say I'm talking to you. How did you guys handle this last year, Shayne? Well, we did this and we did this and we did this, and it was terrible. Well, listen, I'm not saying anything about the way it was done before, or that's every leader has a different philosophy. All I'm telling you is this is my philosophy. We're going to do it a little differently this year. You see what I'm saying? So you're not throwing that person under the bus. You're giving them an opportunity to tell you how it was done. And then subtly, you're telling them it wasn't done real well and we're going to do it differently without saying, well, that's terrible. We're going to do it differently. Does that make sense? So
Mm-hmm.
when you say you lose your community, and I hope I didn't interrupt your thought, I hope you move on with it, but you're also hurting your reputation, I feel like, with the people you lead. Like Sean Payton, somebody in that Denver locker room liked that coach, even though that coach struggled. There are players in that locker room that like that coach, and Sean Payton just threw him under the bus. That immediately, in my mind, damages the relationship between Sean Payton and those players. And those players, I don't think players trust a coach who throws people under the bus because they think that he'll do the same thing to them.
And I think relationships are just as important from the NFL level all the way down to a junior high coach that's
Right.
trying to reach that difficult junior high kid and get the best out of him or her each and every day. And another thing I maybe would relate this to is like a big thing that's just recently passed is the trade deadline in Major League Baseball. And obviously, as Reds fans, you're constantly looking at your team and different things. And I looked at it from a couple different perspectives that I'll tie back into this topic here. I think in terms of leadership, sometimes when you're in charge of something, your accountability piece is in place. You might say to yourself, okay, where can we get better? Where can we improve? Well, okay, some teams need 4 or 5 things. They need huge things. They're real active. But some teams may just go out and randomly get 3, 4 different deals. I don't know if they're any make them any better or not, but their names all over the news, right? And they're bringing in a couple of this, couple
Right.
of that, or whatever. I don't know if they got any better. They made some moves. Yeah, maybe they weren't very good to begin with. But I'll use the Reds example. The Reds had a couple pieces I thought they needed to attack. They attacked one of them. They brought in a left-handed arm in their bullpen. I thought they needed one more arm to help stabilize them for a month or so until they could get back to full strength. They didn't do that. Fine, whatever. But what I'm saying is you have to be accountable for your actions. So like the Cincinnati Reds will be accountable for that decision as they move forward. Same way as a new coach here. If I come in and I'm going to, repaint the locker room or I'm going to do the new uniform or I'm going to do these things, I have to be accountable for what I'm doing and why. I don't have to attack the old on the way out. You see what I'm saying? Because every time every time you make a move and you trade for someone in, someone's got to go, right? So like when all these Major League Baseball teams are bringing a guy in, you're saying that this person's better than what we have on our roster now. That person's got to go. Same way when you come in as a new coach and you say we are going to do it this way because I think it's better. You're
Right.
already indirectly saying you think it's better than the old way. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Fair
Without
enough,
being,
without even
yeah.
saying that. So,
Right.
so my point is, you how can you respectfully lay it out? I think that's what you're talking about. How can you respectfully introduce it? How can you sell it? And then how can you be accountable for it as you go? I love what Aaron Rodgers said in return because I think what some coaches do all the way down to the high school level all the time. I always hear these things and these quotes from these newly hired coaches in terms of it sounds like you're a little concerned that this may not go as well as you thought and you're already building in
Right.
the excuse, right? It's that built-in excuse of, well, I'm coming in trying to clean this mess up if it didn't work. So it and it's kind of like that, hey, look at me, look what I'm getting ready to do. And that's something that's always bothered you. Don't you see a link to some of that social media discussion we've had on expanding the zone before
Yeah.
about how it's self-promotion?
Well, it's self promotion or it's self. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, self protect. I don't know, protection, or you're trying to give yourself some false sense of security by saying it's almost like misery loves company, right? Like if I don't get it done, well, that's just because this place was a mess. Nobody can get it done, and it's like it's almost like that kid who fails a test. I didn't care about that test. I don't, what I mean, because it's easier to say that than admitting you messed up, right? But it's like this too, and I think it leads me to this point, Shayne. When you publicly criticize, it's also a way of making excuses. Sort of for your own performance. Like one of my pet peeves has always been, and I feel really strongly about this, is our coaches who publicly blame their players, all right, for a loss. Listen, if your team gets beat, all right, and they shoot, 25% from the floor and they turn it over 22 times, anyone who's at the game kind of knows whose fault it was. All right. But the coach has to take some blame for that too, because maybe they're not practicing well enough. Maybe they're not, maybe he's not playing the right people, whatever. But I really admire the coaches. And I was taught this as a young coach by Ron Lovely, that you always take the blame publicly for your players. Right. And then in practice, you do what you got to do, right? So I can remember Lovely on the radio shows after our games back in the day, back when radio was the only media there was for high school sports, right? Radio and paper. He would say, hey, this is on me tonight. It starts with me. We didn't get the job done. I'm not doing well enough with these guys here, and I'm not. And I remember sitting there thinking, as a player now, okay, I'm 16 years old. Why is he blaming it? I mean, it was on us. We sucked. Why is coach taking the blame for what we did wrong? You know what I mean? I would think that, right? And then we'd get to practice and he would put the blame on us for sure privately, right? I mean, we would, he would do what he had to do. But you know what? I had so much respect for a guy who, like, he's fallen on the sword for me. I'm the one who lost the game. Me and my teammates, this dude's fallen on the sword for me. And I carried that over as a coach, and you'll hear it all the time. I encourage the people who listen to this show, listen to the Scoreboard show on WKKJ, starting in football. And I'll bet anybody on here at dinner that every single night they listen to it, there's going to be a coach on that show say, well, we went over in practice all week and the players just didn't get it done tonight. We just didn't execute it. I don't know. We talked about it. We had them right. I mean, we had the game plan. They didn't execute it. And that's their way of placing blame, instead of saying, hey, it's on me, I'm the head coach, it's my responsibility, and then going to practice and getting it done the next day. Do you understand what I'm saying with that? So, like, I think it's exactly what you just said with that coach, with Sean Payton, almost giving himself a safety net of, if this doesn't work, look what I had to inherit.
Here's another part of that. I think we're continuing to build on the same point, but we're trying to give some different perspectives that worry me about our profession. Is the coaching profession is so hard. Teaching is so hard. Being a principal is so hard that if we ourselves can't understand that, how in the world do we get people from the outside looking in to buy into our school system, to our coaching systems, to our sports programs, and some of those different things? That's the part that bothers me a little bit. And I look to our top leadership to set the standard. I say, and I guess here's what I mean by that. I'll use another professional or college example and bring it all the way back down to the high school. I worry sometimes that coaches and even players, but we're talking about more coaches and leadership here, become, or they feel like they become, bigger than the sport. I'm starting to see some different things from Bill Belichick, or I've seen it with Greg Popovich throughout some of the different times. When they're winning and they're on top, it's funny. Everyone thinks it's funny. Their interviews are funny and how they do things and say things. But when they lose, it starts to be a bigger deal. I guess for me, I look at it through a whole different lens. I look at it as a borderline arrogance of, like, they reach a point where they feel like they're bigger than the sport.
It's
And
bigger
I
than the
see
game.
that.
Yeah.
Sure, I see that all the way down in the college ranks a little bit, but then unfortunately, Matt, I see it even in the high school. I see some of these people that become more and more successful, and they're people that I look up to, and I've watched, and I'm thinking, like, really? Like, I mean, they get to the point where they become so successful, it's like they become above some of these rules that we're talking about. I mean, it's one of those things where they forget how hard it was to be the first year coach, or they forget that, oh, daggone, man, there's some programs out there that maybe don't have a couple of these things in place that I was very fortunate to have. And it becomes a situation where people that should be the model or the perfect example of who we are, what we do, are becoming some of our counterproductive, or some of our critics within our own profession. Is that fair? Am I looking too deep into that?
No, I don't think you are. I think that, you know, when veteran coaches, people who've been around the block, they have a responsibility, in my opinion, to help younger coaches, even protect younger coaches a little bit, and help coaches grow. I think that's what the best people do. I think the people who are best at what they do, they're willing to share what they do, and they're willing to help others kind of carry that torch. And I think that's why for years I was involved with the Ohio High School Basketball Coaches Association, because I really feel like that association does such a good job of caring about younger coaches. I can remember being a part of meetings where coaches would say, gosh, I don't know what this guy was thinking. And we would have a discussion like, how can we help that guy? Next time we talk to him, you might want to mention to him, let's do it this way. And they provide mentor, like they even provide like, hey, give this guy a call if you need help with something, if you're learning the ropes. Because when I first started coaching, fortunately for me, I just lucked into some of that. Not only the guy that I had played for and coached under was a veteran coach by that point, and Ron Lovely, but I just happened to be able to strike up a friendship with a Larry Jordan or Rick Van Meet, or I remember how nice Tom Barrick was to me when I first started, and Dave Adams, who's since passed, but North Adams legend. You know, these guys took a minute, and sometimes it was just one or two little instances that they probably didn't even think twice about, just type people they were, that helped me as a coach grow, right? So I think that's part of what those coaches need to do. And then obviously, like what you're saying too, the public, when you start, the public criticism goes without saying that you're hurting incoming coaches. But that arrogance you're talking about too, Shayne, I think hurts those coaches, and eventually in some cases ends careers, because I've seen it at the high school level where a coach will be at a particular school and got a kind of that legendary status at that school, right? And short of committing a crime, they're not running him out of there, right? But then all of a sudden he leaves, and a few years later he goes to another school, and he got the arrogance of, okay, I'm here now. It doesn't fly, because that stuff, you can't just live off that forever. You have to do the job where you're at, where your feet are at, like our show a few weeks ago about being where your feet are, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you know arrogance by coaches and by leaders, to me, confidence is great. When it bleeds over to arrogance, that's just going to get in the way.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And as I get closer to, I guess this could even be a little bit of a closing remark to throw back to you, but it's almost like a little promotion for our upcoming show 56. We're going to be talking a little bit about parents who are involved in coaching, and some different things. Well, I'm sure we'll get into some little league, we'll get into some program building, some junior high, some different, I'm sure we'll go a lot of different directions with it. But I guess, Matt, it brings me back to this point here. When I think of coaching, I think of practice what you preach. I think of respecting the profession, respecting. Look, are there bad coaches out there? Sure. There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad
Right.
teachers,
Everything.
there's bad everything. Yeah.
Right.
But the one thing I try to pride myself in is in professional development. I think that's why we do this. I think we've talked about that before. And every year I've made it a point, no matter how long I coach, and I'm getting ready to coach this spring, Lord willing, I think the 28th straight spring of baseball. Every year I try to figure out what's one thing I want to get better at. And then I try to reach out to a coach and ask them, I mean, if it, and it could be, I want to get better at pitching. I want to get better at base running. I want to get better at hitting. I want to get better at culture. I want to get better at facilities. I want to get better at, and gosh, I could run down Hall of Fame list, similar to what you just did, from, Tony Taylor, Don Neff, Rod Gregory, Chris Veit, Ed Yates, Ron Allen, Trevor
Right.
Thomas. And I'm leaving some out, but again, I do this every year, and it's one of those things where you're constantly looking to get better. But the thing I would challenge people is constantly work to get better, and never think that you've reached a point where I got it. I got it. And at the same time, be the other end of that, which is what you're referring to in terms of giving back. The one thing I guess I'm leading into our show 56 that we'll talk about, coaching all the way through the program. I think one of the biggest things that we fail to do in coaching is prepare our next generation.
Right.
I look back on it, and maybe it's a little bit of my fault for not asking. Maybe there were some people that would have been willing if I'd have asked. But there's a lot of things I look back on, and I look at what I did in the first 5, 6, 7 years of coaching, and then I think of some people around me, and if I get mad at them for a second, the first thing I think of is, why did they let me do that? What? You know what I mean? Like, why?
Right.
You know, so I guess in closing remark, and I guess it bridges into our next show, which will be show 56, is what responsibility do we have in the respect for one another, the coaching profession, how hard it is, how we never perfect it. I don't care if you're first year, fifth year, 30th year. I don't care if your career records you won 80% of your games or if you've only won 20% of your games. Listen, I know a lot of great coaches. I mean, great coaches who have lost far more than they've won.
Sure,
I
definitely.
mean, just have.
Yeah.
And I don't mind using the word great. I don't think I use it incorrectly there. And this stuff's hard. Leadership's hard. I mean, being a principal every day is hard. Being a teacher's hard. And so I guess I would ask, in terms of having a respect for your profession, having the back of one another. It's one thing to compete against one person while still respecting the job that we're all trying to do, and the responsibility we have to pay it forward, so to speak, a little bit. And so I guess that's where I'll kind of close it. I'll throw it to you. I'll give you the last word this week.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of keep it short. I think it's been a great discussion, but I'm just going to piggyback a little bit off what you said. I guess what it comes down to for me is that, I think it's important for leaders and for coaches to put together their philosophy, obviously, and put their stamp on their program or their job or whatever. But I think it's so important to be able to be successful without stepping over others to do it. You know what I mean? Like just be successful in what you do, instead of part of your success coming from having to crucify somebody else's reputation or criticize whoever else was involved. It's kind of like in golf, right? They always say you're not supposed to root against that guy you're playing against, right? There's no defense. You're just,
right.
And it's hard. Sometimes you're thinking, oh gosh, if he hits this over here, but you worry about what you're doing, and then that's it. And it's kind of like that in leadership. You worry about what you're doing, and you don't worry about who came before you or what they did. And you certainly, I don't think, need to dwell on what they did and criticize what they did. Just be your own person and do your job the best of your ability. I think people respect that more. I just don't think, again, I truly in my heart do not believe people respect that approach of criticizing the former people. You might get a chuckle or, I hear you, man. Yeah, I agree with you. But that person is going to, in the back of their mind, think, man, if he'd say that about them, what's he saying about me? What's he saying about, you just don't want to be that way. So I think it's been a good show that way, Shayne, with the unwritten rules. I mean, there's other examples I'm sure we could use, but it's like, for me, I think that's it in a nutshell. Be your own person, do your job. Don't worry about being great instead of how bad somebody else was. I guess that's where I'd leave it.
That's a great place to, and again, thank you, Dr. Chris Good. Make sure you're checking us out wherever you get your podcast app or on the YouTube channel. SVC Sport Zone is what you want to look up there, and you can see the video version of Expanding the Zone each and every week. So, Matt, enjoyed it for show 55. We'll be back here soon in the next week or so, show 56. We're going to be talking about parents involved in coaching, and I'm sure that conversation will go a lot of different levels, again, a lot of different levels of leadership. So on that note, we'll get on out of here. Appreciate everybody, and we'll see you next time on Expanding the Zone.